actually, I've never met in person. I've met Tricia actually through the World Economic Forum, the Data for Common Purpose initiative that we're collaborating on together, or have been collaborating on together for quite some time, where we're looking at how we use data for common good and to actually do some decency in the world. However, you know, Tricia was leading a work stream and we immediately hit it off, and I don't know, we seem to have had some pretty fantastic discussions about crypto and blockchain, and every time I talk to Tricia, she kind of forces me to think a little bit more and think a little bit bolder about what I'm doing, and so I always really value that, and I thought it's great fun to finish the day on a presentation like Tricia's, because it will give us a lot to talk about over wine. And Tricia, I will let you introduce yourself. She is an ethnographer and has done incredible amounts of work. So anyway, go for it, Tricia. Over to you. Introduce yourself and your background, however you wish to.
Kathy. It is so excited to be here as we're celebrating your new appointment as the new ERA chair. And also I hear you're hiring of 5 people, which is incredible. So my name is Tricia Wang, and I find that it's pretty unfair that I cannot be there in person to really meet all of you. So I'm sorry that we have to do this online. So if there are any questions or any screenshots you want to take, feel free to post them to Twitter or Instagram. Feel free to ping me directly. It's because, you know, I'm not in the same room with y'all. And my handle will always be on the bottom of every slide, but you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm quite responsive. So today, what I would love to talk about is to close out this big event is a spatial collapse, designing for crypto and blockchain. And what I would actually like as a promise to you is that I'm not going to talk very much about crypto and blockchain, maybe just like until the very end, because I think what I would like to do today is to actually help you see just the context. You've already had amazing speakers. I heard that Addie from Algorand spoke, and you've already had really great speakers and partners actually position probably, you know, what is crypto and blockchain. So we don't need to get into any of that. What I would like to actually position crypto and blockchain is to help explain the context historically, what is happening around it. My background is a sociologist, so I went from being more of an on-the-ground organizer and builder of tech programs to going into academia, and then I left academia. Now I usually have one foot in working with think tanks and institutions like yours, and then I spend most of my time actually consulting companies on making sure that they know how to take advantage of technologies such as crypto and blockchain, but in a human-centered way. So that's my promise to you. You're going to hear very little about crypto and blockchain. You're going to walk out knowing how to understand crypto and blockchain in the greater context of history. So I'm going to start off talking about what I call spatial collapse pre-pandemic. So you're going to be like, why is this about crypto and blockchain? I promise you there's a link though, okay? So let's just go with me on this quick historical ride. Is that right now, pre-pandemic, this is more or less probably what your life was like. There was home, there was first space, there were things that you do in your home. And then there was second space, things that you would do at work. You would leave home, put on your work clothes, and you would maybe travel, take a train. And then there was third space. This is everything that you do outside of first and second space. This is like going to the bar, you know, meeting strangers. It's like going to the park, going to a library. It's just like a life outside of our home and work. Now, what happened during the pandemic, COVID pandemic, is that all these spaces collapse unto themselves with work from home policy. So unless you were an essential worker, you didn't have to leave your home to go to work. We started to do even more things digitally, and all of these spaces collapse onto each other. So where I'm standing right now is where I would eat my breakfast, my meal. If you could see my desk, it's like there's evidence of breakfast and food. This is where I would talk to my mother. It also is a space where I do all my work. My desk is filled with my work notebooks, and my walls have like my sticky notes. It's where I'm giving a talk right now. So this is literally where I also do my work. And then this is also where I was hanging out, especially during the days where you couldn't even leave your home. You know, it's where I was like trying to do like online performances and go to an online theater show, you know, and it's also where I was just, you know, meeting other strangers online, like spending time on Reddit. That's all stuff that's considered, you know, online third spaces. So all those spaces collapse onto each other, so that where we're standing or sitting is where we did everything. And where you are right now, I'm looking at an image of people in the audience, is that I just realized you can't see my screen, huh? I'm sorry. I should go back to, I didn't switch to that. So this is my Twitter handle and my Instagram handle. So Trisha Wong. And now I'm going to forward back because I did not switch screens. And this is the slide that I was on. Yes, first, second, third space. These all used to be separate spaces. And then during the pandemic, it collapsed all onto each other so that this is the only space that we were doing everything. And, life was a bit interesting. Working from home does not feel like this when you can never leave home. And then some of us became multi-expert at multitasking, especially those who are caretakers. If you had to take care of family members, of all ages. And many of us just completely were exhausted, right? It didn't feel like it was more of a vacation by being able to stay at home all day. It was just very tiring. And so many of us came out of this pandemic being like, what is going on? And we're still in it. As you can see, being in person is very special. You all still have your masks on. Now, what happened during this spatial collapse of spaces moving onto each other is that around the world globally, time spent online increased. On a platform that's like Twitter in China, it saw a 31% increase of time spent there. Just in the US, this is like the before and after of how much time children spend on YouTube, right? So there's so much data coming back from all around the world of what happened during the spatial collapse. But the idea here is that we're just spending more time in digital space. All these first, second, third spaces that used to be more distributed physically have now moved onto online, where a lot of our lives are being represented online. And this is a really historical change. I mean, it really, I want to be able to say that this is not something that's to be taken lightly. We are all experiencing a spatial collapse, and that's a disruption of our mental models of how we navigate physical spaces. So the question is, coming out of this pandemic, what's temporary, what comes next, what's permanent, what is new? And we want to know this because we all want to make the right decisions, right? My background as a tech ethnographer is I'm trying to always understand what is happening in data, digital, and design. And these questions are really important of what happens next. In my company that I run, Sudden Compass, we work with organizations to make human-centric decisions in a data-driven world. And so a lot of our clients are also wondering, well, what should we do? Where do we invest our time? And so the way I want to be able to play kind of a guide into what's happening with the spatial collapse is to position it as historically, we have had many spatial collapses. This is not our first one. So if we're wondering what's going to come out of this COVID pandemic one, I would love to be able to take us back to one of the ones that are more recent, but that has had a similar level of impact, which is during the Industrial Revolution, and new forms of structures emerged, such as time. And I think the one we're going through is so big that the only way to conceptualize the spatial collapse is to go backwards to look at, well, when was the last time something as big as this happened? Because it has everything to do with crypto and blockchain. Because during the Industrial Revolution, when that happened, that kind of spatial collapse, when people were moved off of land, became landless. They moved from a feudal society where they had a common structure of life. It was not first, second, and third space, because there, as you see, their home, their land is where they did everything. It was more in one place. It was their farm, and there wasn't the separation of work and home in the way we understand it. This is very much a modern invention. Is that back then, when this shift happened, when the enclosure movement happened, which is thousands of acts, right, of policies, literally policies, that moved people off of common feudal land and then moved them into cities where by 1800, the number of cities with populations of more than 20,000 people in England and Wales rose from 12 to 200. This was historic, and entirely new forms of structures of interaction, of economic interaction emerged from this time. These are the very structures that we're still living with. So imagine if you could say well, what if we're going through one right now, which is what I would like to help us understand, is that we're going through such a massive shift that it's really hard to know when you're in the middle of a shift. And I think the lab that Kathy is building, the lab that Technical is supporting, and all these amazing funders of yours who see the possibilities, is that they have insight into something that many of us, I think much of society is still catching up with, which is that we are in a moment of historical change. And the privilege that we have is right now we can study it. So back then, so I want to take us back to the Industrial Revolution, is that back then, these are the kind of factories that people worked in. And one of the interesting things that happened during this time, one of the most interesting inventions that is tied to the way we do accounting, the way we treat people in labor and capitalism, the way we extract capital, is actually related to how people were valued and their time was, their value, their input was measured. And there was an invention of time. And in these kind of factories, factory bosses stole time. People coming from farms had no idea what personal time was because they worked according to the sun and moon, and they had their own hours and structures tied to agricultural land. They were not on a capitalistic wage labor. And as they were being introduced to these cities, because they were forced, I would say, not introduced, is that all of a sudden you had managers who are not allowing workers to bring in clocks. Kind of like imagine modern casinos, is that they don't have clocks, there's no windows, so they couldn't see time, they couldn't see the sun, and they couldn't see the earth's movement. They weren't allowed to ask what time, there was no policies on regulating time. And so some of the first things that happened when workers organized was around this sense of personal time, that time wasn't just something abstract. It didn't just belong to bosses, but it belonged to them. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that people found a way to take advantage of this abstract nature of time to capitalize on a different understanding of the economic value. While on one end, you had managers manipulating time, on the other end, you had people coming together to understand we have personal time. And there was this arbitrage of their lack of understanding, and there was abuse of it. One of the most interesting pieces of text I found was this 12-year-old boy named James Dundee back then, who wrote this piece. He said such were the nominal hours, but in reality, there were no regular hours. Masters and managers did with this as they liked. The clocks at the factories were often put forward in the morning and back at night. Instead of being instruments for the measurement of time, they were used as cloaks for cheaters and oppression. And though this was known amongst the hands, all were afraid to speak, and a workman that was afraid to carry a watch, as it was no uncommon event to dismiss anyone who presumed too much about the science of horology. So questions started to emerge of who has the right to control over personal times. As you can see from this factory description, it was completely not in the hands of workers. And so when people start to create the initial unions, they uprose, they did uprisings against factories. And this is where the genesis of our modern conceptions of first, second, and third space come from. They created a logo back then, this emerged in England, which is 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of rest. You can map it right now straight to first, second, third space. First space is home, 8 hours of rest. Second space, 8 hours of labor. And third space, 8 hours of recreation. And this spread like a meme across the world. You had other countries that were working with capitalism where workers started to realize, oh, we should fight for this kind of structure of time that's personal time. You had Uruguay doing, you had America and the US, except for in the US, I thought it was interesting. They turned the third space into for what we will, 8 hours of that for what we will. And then you had it in Sweden. Now, I feel if we take it back to modern time, is that we're going through also a similar kind of revolution. And it's really being centered around this concept of financial nihilism, or any kind of nihilism. But really one of the things that is coming out most clearly around crypto and blockchain is one of the first applications that is most popular, at least being productized at scale, is cryptos and blockchain's financial services. Even though it can be used for much more in life, that is one of the, right now, the first mainstream applications. And what I see it reflecting as with my sociologist hat on, is that right now there's a sudden, widespread sentiment that perhaps the systems that have been constructed, whether it's been for hundreds of years from Industrial Revolution or currently right now since the financialization of our economy, from subprime mortgages to labor, to entirely new labor structures where there's been an outsourcing or globalization of labor, that something isn't working out, that perhaps we can't trust the current institutions that we're working, that are supposed to take care of us. And for a while, government and state were seen as similar, as one and the same. But right now there's a separation of that, where there's a lot of suspicion of, are governments here to take care of us? Or is it more about preservation of one's party? And I feel that this sentiment, this is a concept that comes from Dimitri, who runs a podcast named Hidden Forces, is that when I heard him explain that there was this thing called financial nihilism, and that explains much of the current dissatisfaction with the world, I finally felt that this was a concept that helped place why there's so much interest in crypto. And this, not just the technical interest, but the sociological significance of how there could be a global movement of people questioning all at the same time, perhaps the current systems designed for us don't work. And this is why it's so much of a feat of what you all have committed of creating a lab to actually study what kind of new products can be designed. How do we make technology in the context of where people are losing trust with institutions? How do you make something that benefits society? So what I want to spend the last half of my talk on is, now I will start using the word crypto and blockchain. So I promised you that there was a link, is to think about some tools and ways to think about this period that we're in, to be able to contextualize, how do we understand this nihilism? How do we understand the benefits of crypto and blockchain, the technological benefits of it, while also looking at the social impact of it? Now, one concept or one kind of framework I've always loved is Stuart Brand's Pace Layers framework. And Stuart Brand is one of the early leaders of the information revolution, where he famously coined the phrase, "information wants to be free." And so his heuristic is, he has this thing called, in his book, The Clock of the Long Now, is this thing called the Pace Layers framework. And it's a way to understand massive social infrastructural change. And his argument is that there's different layers of change that happen in a society. And it's easiest to see, and it's quickest to see something that's happening on the outer layers, like fashion. You see that change right away, especially with fast fashion, right? And with the new kind of the new structure of supply chains, is that you can have fast fashion, you can have circular economies, and then you start to see the change in commerce. And his argument is that nature changes the slowest, as the slowest to respond, or at least for you to see the changes visually as a human being. And so for fashion, we've already seen some of these kind of changes during this COVID pandemic of the spatial collapse. There's real arguments about, are they sweatpants or are they joggers? There's a sudden sales. You see the sudden sales of in-house clothing, right? There's a whole new kind of line where people are selling, Zoom-ready clothing, where it's just like wasted up. Who knows what I'm wearing below my top? It's just like, it doesn't really matter, because we're all now kind of bob heads in this kind of, spatial pandemic world where we can do talks from abroad, from afar. And we've already seen changes in commerce, where you see that businesses are exploring new models. My examples right now are more US centric, but I know this is happening globally, where, for example, one of my favorite things to cite is that in the US and Canada, there's a reuse of parking lots as testing centers or as playgrounds. There's really an innovative thinking of how do we design for our urban cities. There's been a move to e-commerce, like that's the new way of buying everything right now, and that's a global phenomenon. Now, the layers that I'm most interested in, that I think are really relevant for the lab, is that you have this luxury to think about what are the changes that are going to happen, maybe not this very second, but maybe next year, because that's how fast things are happening. Or how do we link some of these changes together are happening on multiple layers? So I've been fascinated by the layers of infrastructure, governance, and culture, because while I'm working with our clients in the commerce layer of improving the product, my other half of my life, I want to think about these deeper layers so I can understand how is it influencing commerce and fashion later on. But especially these layers are harder to see and harder to quantify. And there's so much happening at an infrastructural level and at a governance and culture level. And so one of the things I've been looking at is a sudden increase in the tech lobbying's effort. It's like, for example, in the EU, and you see that some of the biggest tech lobbyers are big tech platforms. And I think this is a sign of that even the companies themselves know that they have to start to be there at the governance layer. And whether they're doing good or bad, that's another argument. But if you look around, there are signs that there are people who are understanding that we are in a moment of great change. We now all of a sudden during the spatial pandemic had discussions about how Bitcoin fits in a retirement portfolio as a mainstream conversation. These kind of things weren't happening before. And so the fascinating thing about spatial collapses is that they produce this thing called emergent culture. And culture is reflective of everything from our technologies, from our points of view, to the way we want to create new governance models. And I believe that one of the most interesting things and why I think this lab is so critical is that there is this intersection around culture of decentralized and distributed technologies. And that's a technical end, but because of this technology, it's creating new forms of value and it's creating new forms of organizing in parallel and similar to the level of change and new creation of value and organizing that happened during the Industrial Revolution. So if we can imagine that if the Industrial Revolution created the kind of structures that we're sitting in right now, what's happening with this spatial collapse is that many of those institution structures are being questioned or being reinvented or being pushed back upon. And I believe that crypto and blockchain sits right at that intersection of exactly this change of new forms of value and new forms of organizing. This is a often used visual to be able to explain just how much of a change this is that there are centralized technologies like different forms of the social media services you use. It's all centralized, or your banking services. Then there's decentralized, hence the name of Kathy's lab at Technico. And then there's distributed forms. What I'm really interested in is seeing what happens when you combine all three of these things. Some people treat this as a binary or as clean silos, of that you have a centralized world or a decentralized world. And the reality is that our world is not going to move from one to the other. These kind of shifts don't happen cleanly, is that there's always legacy tools, there's always existing structures. What's fascinating is that when you add decentralized and distributed technologies on top of a world that is still trying to maintain centralized control. And that's when you get really interesting stuff from what we're seeing right now. And that's what the lab gets to be able to analyze and be able to advise the world of this new generation of designers and entrepreneurs to figure out. Now, one of the pathways of value that I already see this, we're in a moment of humongous change, is that when we think about how something becomes new value, it moves, this is a way to think about it, is it moves from being a collectible to a store of value, to a medium exchange, to a unit of accounting. So if you look at the second to last line, that's the USD, right? It can be any currency. I put the USD there because it is the ultimate settlement currency right now. But it moved, right now, it's a unit of accounting. This is how businesses do their reports. This is how we get shareholder reports of how a business is structured. But you can imagine in Portugal, you also have your own currency, and it's also your own unit of accounting, or wherever you're listening to from in the world. Every country has their own unit of accounting, and the currency had to move through these stages. Now, there's other forms of things that have value that have not moved to a unit of accounting. For example, sneakers, they moved from being a collectible. They started out that way to being a store of value for many people. Collectibles, they're collectibles for some people, but this sneaker that I'm showing here, which is the Drake Nike sneaker, if there are any Drake fans out there, is that this is a $100,000 sneaker. It's not just a collectible, it is a store of value for some people. And there's a whole entire world where sneakers are auctioned off or sold or being exchanged. I have here on the second line is Pokemon cards. I don't know if there's any Pokemon fans out there, but it moved from being a collectible, and for some people it is. My nephew, who is 5 years old, is a Pokemon collector. But then it's a store of value also, because there are some Pokemon cards that are worth thousands of dollars, which is like crazy to me. Wine is maybe something, I know wine is happening after me, so that's another reason why I'm sad I'm not there in person. But a wine is a collectible for some people, but it has also become a store of value for those who are collecting it and waiting and sitting on it to sell it one day, right? So it can play both kind of roles. Now, what I'm fascinated by is the rise of crypto and the rise of coins and the coins and tokens in crypto and blockchain, to see how it's moved from being a collectible. I remember the early days of owning Bitcoin, and we were just like, buying pizza with it, right? It was just a collectible. It's like, whatever. It's like, let's pay, you know, a Bitcoin for a pizza. And then it becomes a store of value. But where it is right now, it's a medium of exchange. It's becoming a medium of exchange where you see PayPal has now integrated accepting Bitcoin payments and other forms of crypto now. I forget which coins. I don't think they're doing any tokens yet at all. They're not, that's not what they're touching. But you also see Cash App, you see different kind of apps that were only in the traditional finance space. They're starting to accept. You see companies also, small businesses accepting payment, and even large businesses are starting to accept it. It's not moved to being a unit of accounting, but you can see it has gotten farther. And I think this is a fascinating change. This is a sign that the spatial collapse has accelerated this kind of new way of interacting, transacting value. And we see this, you know, total crypto, the market cap of crypto has hit 2.7 trillion. It's only increased. And you see, though, that the crypto market still doesn't compare to the traditional stock market. We had the New York Stock Exchange, which is sitting at like 30 billion plus. So it's still very small, as you can see some of the numbers. But the question is, I think I get from a lot of people is like, I don't get this, you know, WTF, what is this? Is this for reals? And I think it's a legitimate question, because when you're in the middle of seeing a massive social structural shift, it is very difficult to parse. Imagine being in the Industrial Revolution and you were just kicked off your land, or, you know, you're questioning, you know, you ended up in a city and someone's like, you know, someone's telling you, hey, we're moving to a wage labor system. And this is a whole new form of financial capitalism and labor extraction. I think a worker, you know, or someone who hasn't even become a worker yet would be like, what are you talking about? I can't comprehend you, right? Because it was just the early days. And what I want to be able to help us understand is that we are such in the early days of crypto right now in blockchain, and that it's a very crazy, if it seems like a crazy, confusing world, it's because it is. It absolutely is. And you need guides, you need centers like the ones that the one you're building right now, to be able to help us all make sense of it and to help us speed up the kind of mistakes that we should be avoiding, and to help us, give us frameworks and tools to actually accelerate how to move forward. And because the space is confusing, when I'm, you know, if someone's like looking at, you know, Shiba Inu coin, which is a 30 billion market cap, right? You have articles about why the Shiba coin could be dangerous investment compared to other cryptocurrencies. And literally, yes, the logo is a dog and is named after a Shiba because that's what the founder loved, was Shiba, to an article in legit investment, you know, sites like the Motley Fool, which is cryptocurrency. Should Shiba Inu make you a millionaire? And if you're reading this on the outside, it's like, what, WTF? There's a freaking dog that's going to make me a millionaire. Are you serious? I'm supposed to invest in this? And it's real. Here's a white paper from the Shiba Inu ecosystem, and they call it the wolf paper. Not just a white paper. These are all things you can find online. They have entire diagrams of how you can stake Shiba, the coin, and how you can make money with it, and how it's all based on decentralization, hence, you know, the lab here. And point number 3 of why Shiba is because someone really loves dogs. And you look at this and you're just like, this is crazy. I'm going to, you know, bet my future on a freaking dog. So yes, this is the space that we're in. And crypto has all of this space. You know, there's a survey that nearly half of millennials are very comfortable owning cryptocurrencies. So there's increasing comfort in it, but also there's articles such as that show that roughly 1/3 of Bitcoin is controlled by a small cabal of whales, and whales are people who are holding on to massive amounts, right? So it's not just everyday people. It's like if you're holding, you know, your 100% of your worth in Bitcoin. So it's very confusing. You hear about scams all day, or hacks. You know, latest DeFi hack from Cream was like, I think $130 million in DeFi, and then there you hear about people being kidnapped to release their Bitcoin. And then you have The Guardian, where the Bank of England just said Bitcoin could trigger a financial meltdown that rivals the subprime mortgage that happened in the US. And there was also a global meltdown in 2008. But then you have or institutions like the World Economic Forum, who are legitimately bringing stakeholders together. And they have articles like this, where Africa's crypto market has grown by 105 billion in the last year. And we know that global adoption of crypto has been up since 2,300% since Q3 of 2019. And just since 2020, since our spatial collapse, it's been up 881%. And I think this is an example where you can see a spatial collapse has accelerated this underlying feeling that something isn't working for us, that the traditional financial structure isn't working, and maybe our current governments, that our institutions we trust aren't working, that we need to look for new forms of organizing that are distributed, that aren't just centralized in institutions. And it's about people looking at new forms of value. And you see this all around the world, where it's not just a US, it's not just a Western phenomenon. This is from Chain Analysis, the top countries in Chain Analysis Crypto Adoption Report. And you see it's a lot of non-Western countries. And you have organizations like WEF putting out other articles, such as a guide to cryptocurrencies, or the Wall Street Journal, who just announced that there's a big Bitcoin ETF that's here and that's been approved. So the point is that like, it's a confusing space. This is just like a quick review of like, it's crazy, it's dangerous to like, these are legit forms of wealth creation, right? How are we supposed to make sense of it? So there's a lot of promises that decentralized technology such as crypto and blockchain will benefit society. But truly, I would argue that the value is still unclear. The industry, as much as we can say there is an industry, is still working itself out. It's still hard to figure out, do we take a dog like a Shiba Inu coin seriously, or do you invest in just Bitcoin or all of it, right? We're still in the early days, because we're creating a new architecture of trust. This is a decentralized movement of creating this architecture of trust, and it involves everybody. It involves founders, it involves the engineers who are designing all these coins, it involves the founders of coins like Shiba Inu, it involves everyone like you all in the audience. Is that right now we're in the middle of this spatial collapse that is seeing a rise in the new architecture of trust, one that is attempting to push back on the structures that have been created over the last few hundred years to creating a new one. But it's very messy in the meantime. So the question for us is, now that you all in the audience, we all know, that this is the new architecture that's being created, and we are wise enough to be able to say, yes, we're in the middle of this change. What are we going to do differently so that in 10 to 20 years, we don't look back and say, who could have imagined that with Web 3.0? And I'm using the term Web 3.0 just very loosely to be able to describe all these new technologies and ways of organizing that distributed and decentralized platforms are and tools are enabling us to do. So we are still in Web 2.0, but Web 3.0, what is that going to do? And for Web 2.0, we had all these promises that, if the information will be free, and that if people have access to technology, there will be more equality. And I was one of those believers back in my early career as a sociologist, building tech centers. I was like, yes, if people just had more access to technology, their lives will be better. And that is not true at all. Right now, I think all of us can agree, looking around at the destruction that Facebook, platforms like Google, that it's not so clear that there have been real destructions to communities, to entire states and societies attributed to how information spreads on Facebook, that there's a lack of accountability, but there's also amazing things that have come out of these platforms. So that was the messiness of Web 2.0, and many of us believed it, including myself. And now, as we want to avoid technological determinism, the question is, how do we now make sure that if we have a head start with Web 3.0, how do we make sure that it doesn't create more inequality? And I think that's why these kind of spaces are so critical. And countries and universities that invest in asking this question are going to be way ahead to ask, how do we ensure crypto is a beneficial social impact? And as I understand, Portugal, physically, geographically, is an amazing place to be hosting this kind of lab, where there's been a lot of policies that are crypto friendly. And the NASDAQ lists Portugal as one of the top places, especially with the new technological free zone that was put into place in April 2020. And now there's been recently 2 cryptocurrency exchanges. I was poking around at these exchanges. And so I cannot imagine a better place for a lab like Decentral to exist. And when Kathy sent me her vision for it, Kathy, I stole some slides from you, where she wrote this thing, a slide that says, not an ivory tower, real world problems, real world research. I was like, yes, this is exactly it. Something like this that needs to help people see, the bigger picture. And so I close with just one more metaphor to help us think through, is that I feel that labs like Decentral are so critical because they help us be more foxy in a world of hedgehogs. And what do I mean by this? There's this quote that's been popularized by Isaiah Berlin that came from a Greek poet, Archilochus. I'm not sure how you say his name, but the quote is, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And if there's anything I can help you understand is that right now in the world of crypto and blockchain, if you feel confused, if you're like, WTF, what is this? We have a lab and there's a lab here. I know this place, but why do people like Kathy know so much? And why do I feel like it's very confusing maybe for me? Because I feel that like half the time when I'm talking to Kathy, I'm like mind blown, is right now, there's a lot of hedgehogs. There's a lot of hedgehog thinking, especially in a new space, such as crypto and blockchain, where there's a new architecture of trust, is that you'll hear people be like, and crypto is good because of the technology. And someone else would be like, crypto is good because of like freedom, right? And there's a lot of kind of these siloed slice thinking. And what the fox knows, as the fox as one of the apex creatures in the ecosystem, is that for a fox to survive, they have to be able to see the entire landscape. And so we need to be more foxy. We need spaces that allow us to be foxes, to see the entire ecosystem. Because when I look at crypto, I see a lot of competing narratives and it's just freaking confusing. I mean, here's just a small list I was making. I was like, let me prepare some like hedgehog thinking, right? Around crypto that I've been hearing about the value of crypto and blockchain. And it's all over the place. And some people will argue it's really only this, or like some people will argue, oh, we don't even care about it. It's just like portfolio diversification. And some people are saying, no, it's really the values for enterprises, and others will be like, no, it's just a pristine currency and Bitcoin's the only thing and you don't need to look at other coins and Shiba Inu is like crap. And others will be like, no, this is about preserving human rights. This is about freedom. Others will say they're anti-government because this will evade government control. And I was thinking, well, basically, at least in this whole entire ecosystem I'm seeing, it's being reduced down to some people are in it, are seeing it for the money. Others see it as like a new form of freedom. Others are in it because the technology is amazing. And so it's very confusing. So how do we make sense of this as a fox? How do we design for understanding of 3.0? And there are a few ways that I think would be useful walking out of this. And I'm just going to quickly review it and then leave you to wine. These are ways that I've heard Kathy talk to me about the lab and I'm reflecting back to Kathy, in my language, the kind of things that I'm doing in the crypto blockchain space, but also this has nothing to do with crypto by itself. It's just an approach to understanding any form of social change. And it just so happens right now, I think what's happening in crypto blockchain is one of the most exciting places to be. So I hope you can walk around with these ways, these kind of frameworks, or this kind of way of seeing and understanding 3.0. And I know that Kathy's going to apply these moving forward because already this is designed into her way of working. The first is to look at what are roles versus rules. When there's massive social change, it's very easy to be like, there's change, but I really think it's important that we distinguish between when there's a change in rules, which is change in policies, to actual change in roles, to look at, well, is a power structure actually changing? Are people doing something truly differently? Or are you just giving them an app and they're just doing more of the same thing? So that's one kind of framework. The second thing that's really important is to think always about integrating thick data. This is to avoid what I call the quantification bias. So thick data is the most direct, unmediated data from human beings. And in this world right now, it's incredibly important because most of the pendulum has really swung towards the valuing of just numbers, of big data, of large scale data collection. But we need places like Decentral to make room for sociologists and anthropologists and designers to come together to gather the qualitative data that doesn't show up in numbers. It's making sure that that integration happens so that it's not just resting upon, well, these are the kind of facts and figures that we're seeing, but that there's an integration of both, of big data and thick data, to bring the machine intelligence and human intelligence together. This slide to me encompasses part of the big vision that's behind labs like Decentral, because it's saying you're not just asking what is happening, you're asking why is this happening? And for that to happen, you have to be multidisciplinary. And that's how we fight the quantification bias, which is the unconscious belief of valuing the measurable over the immeasurable. And that the last few things is around making sure that you avoid tech determinism, around looking at not conflating just because something is technically decentralized, that doesn't imply that there is going to be social value in that, or that socially we are more decentralized. There's always a tech layer and there's always a social layer. So to be really strong in your thinking there. And that requires discipline hopping. This is one of my favorite books by Alexander Galloway, who wrote a book on protocol. And he talks about how protocol, the ways we design protocol, it could be anything from blockchain protocols to web protocols, is reflective of culture. And he writes, you know, discipline hopping is a necessity when it comes to complicated socio-technical topics like protocol. And I can't imagine a better place to start those conversations than at Central, Decentral. And the last thing is user-centered design, to avoid just doing tech-centered design. Right now, crypto and blockchain, and this is really how Web 2.0 was also designed, is that it has not been user-centered. Really, it's been tech-centric, which is the technology first and then the users last. What we want to move to is a user at the center and the technology surrounding it. And so with those things, I have seen all of these 5 kind of ways of thinking in how Kathy's been describing to me the vision of Decentral, where it's like a lot of discipline hopping, a lot of cross-functional work, this requirement of, you know, you're not just understanding protocols of DAO, but you're understanding how cultural changes and domain expertise affect that. And so with that, I would love to thank you for letting me, you know, share some of the stuff I'm doing. One of the things I would love to just share before I get off stage is that there's a new collaboration that we're doing with the World Economic Forum, where the WEF has started a new kind of platform called CISA. And their main question is, how can we create integrated, inclusive, and sustainable growth of the crypto ecosystem? And I think that there's a sign that, like, you know, when I see the vision of Decentral Lab and I see the vision of World Economic Forums, here, this new accelerator they're calling the CISA, which is a Crypto Impact and Sustainability Accelerator, is that important places that know where the world is going are making space. So you see the WEF creating CISA. I see Technico creating this space, this lab. And there are a few places around the world where you have leaders who are visionary, who say, you know what, we're moving from just a more dominant, centralized world to this new kind of structure, new architecture of trust. And so I believe making spaces like this are incredibly important. You have the WEF doing it. You now have Technico doing this. And this kind of change that we're in is so crazy. And so I hope that, you know, I've given you some tools to embrace the unknown. And if you have any other questions, this is my Instagram and Twitter, and I will, Kathy can, you know, share my information, but thank you so much for allowing me to end your this exciting moment marking the history of creating an entire new lab to study the future of this momentous social change. And I now pass it over back to you, Kathy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Trisha. Really appreciate it. I always find it a bit weird to look at my own slides, but thank you. Thank you. I always go, oh, there's an error. Any questions? Does everyone just want wine? I think
it's okay. I would want wine too, so it's totally fine. It's just like 7 a.m. here, so.
Any questions at all? No? Everyone. Marianne, please go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you hear me? Yes. Should I move closer to the microphone?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, I can't hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. It was great to hear you. Really inspiring. I was thinking about how you began talking about feudalism and then in relation to the Industrial Revolution, and that the idea of measuring time as a kind of new form of technology. Of course, in feudalism, there was already, in a sense, a purchase of time, but it was like from sunrise to sunset. But it's the technology of horology that then all of a sudden becomes like a trusted technology that then can measure time much more efficiently and objectively, right? And so I was wondering also what lessons might be learned from that in terms of now we associated blockchain with the architecture, you know, the technology of trust, perhaps in a not so different way from how we trusted it back then. And as you showed in that slide by I believe, a 12-year-old account of, that technology being able to be tampered with very easily. Thanks.
Oh, what's your name?
Mariana.
Mariana?
Yes, Mariana. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marianne, for the question. So I think the question was, how do we, with the emergence of something like personal time and trusting such a system, how do I see that now with the current technology around crypto and blockchain, right? Of new forms of trust. Yeah. So I think what's interesting is that right now, the difference in the technology is that what we're arguing is technically things are decentralized and distributed. And I think that there's a danger in the argument to think that just because something is decentralized and distributed, that there is more, that the system can be more trustworthy or that it's better for society. I think that it presents a new kind of architecture of trust, but not necessarily one that is better. And there's some people who are decentralization diehards and would be like, no, just it's decentralized forms are always better. And it's like, well, do you want a nuclear center to be managed decentrally, or would you want it to be managed centrally, And so I think that the technology always sits in a social infrastructure, and that there is nothing inherently deterministic to say that because the technology is decentralized that it's better or worse. So when we think about time, right, that back then was emergence of time. What I didn't get into, there wasn't enough time for today in this talk, is that I think there's an equal parallel, which is that there's an emergence of the idea of personal data. Is that for many years, sites, big tech has been able to succeed precisely because most people did not understand the value of their data, and that their data is theirs, and that it's personal data. And that's why treating your data as personal is important, to have control over it. And I think right now it gets confusing because there are some people who argue, there's a lot of arguments around, we want privacy. Some people are scared of companies taking their data. Some people are afraid of the data learning so much from them that the AI will then replace them. But there are a lot of fears that are kind of being talked about under the umbrella of privacy. But really, I believe that what people are scared about is that if there's more representations of my data that are out there, the companies like Facebook are collecting. That's right now in Zoom. They have a recording. If this is being recorded and recorded to the cloud, I don't even know how many representations of this are out there, or versions of this talk, right? It becomes scary to think through, if all these representations of me are out there, what does it actually make me, right? Are those extensions of me as a person? Do I have control over these representations? And I think we're in the early days, in the same way that it took, I would say, a few hundred years for people to understand that time was theirs and something to fight for. We're going through a similar change with data, that data is ours. And even though there's multiple, now we are in a world where in order to interact digitally, there are hundreds, if not thousands of representations. If you think about when you do a credit report, the government has biometric data, your health data, every time you log into social media, all the advertising, that's all you. And I think only now recently people starting to understand that data is mine. It's being argued under the banner of privacy, but really I think it's about personhood, that like there's something massively wrong if we don't know how to control representations of myself. In the same way, if I couldn't control my arm, it would be a problem if I don't have any sense of how to manage these representations of me. And I think that there's a lot of interesting work that's happening around crypto and blockchain to help people manage, to help people think through this control of data. And I think it's unresolved, but there's a lot of work happening around smart contracts and the integration of data, of oracles, of things that are on chain or off chain. But to me, it's one of the most exciting places to be researching, is how the promise of blockchain and crypto to be able to, especially blockchain, distributed blockchain platforms, to be able to enable perhaps a different kind of relationship with our data. But I would say it's still up in the air, but this is one of the exciting places to research.
Fantastic.
Hi, just one here. I was wondering, we were having a discussion.
Hello.
If you think that we will come out of this with a revolution or an evolution.
Thank you for your question. What's your name?
Nuno.
Bruno?
Nuno.
Nuno. N-U-N-O. Nuno.
Okay, Nuno. I think that's what I heard. Sorry, there's a big echo in the room. Thank you for your question. So it is, do I think we're going to come out of this with evolution or revolution? I think things are going to get a lot more screwed up. And I also think that there's going to be amazing things that come out of it too. I think like we have a chance to intervene. And I think in the way that we didn't have with Industrial Revolution or Web 2.0, because people were like so excited about it that they weren't like, actually, this could like screw up society a lot. So I think that like we're a little smarter this time. I would hope there's more spaces like Decentral. I am saddened that there isn't more attention to this. That's why I also think what is happening here is so momentous. But I don't think it's like a clean answer. You know, I think that it really is still up in the air of how this is going to benefit society. But I think we're going to see both. And it's going to take the will of the people of places like this lab and leaders that are like Sheila Warren, who is heading all of this stuff at the Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution at WEF, to really question the system and to break it down, and who's willing to be brave enough to go past the traditional barriers. But I think with anything in society is that it's going to be there's going to be a lot of problems and inequities, but the question is always, how do you decrease the level of inequities? I'm under no guise that like this is going to make society better. I think it's really, I understand there's a lot of narratives like, oh, this is going to change society, crypto is going to make things better, and we're now going to have all new forms of value and currency and exchange, and people are going to move around freely, and it's about sovereign individual. I mean, there's so much technical utopianism and crypto utopianism out there, and I understand that's where people are at, because like it's the beginning of a revolution, and as you know, with any revolution, there's always your idealists, you know, but they're often the ones that are like, they don't survive till the end. It's about, I think, the people doing the slow, important work, the foxy work, not just being a hedgehog. Like we have to do that foxy work to be like, well, what are the systems that we need to build? And you see that in any massive social change, there are always people behind the scenes. The question is, are they terrible? Like, you know, are they more aware of how it's exacerbating inequities, or are they going to be, be just terrible people making things worse? And I think like we have a chance to make things better, not some kind of binary of like a perfect world or a terrible world, but one where we can actually ask, do kind of brave stuff like this. So I think that's like a non-answer to your question.
Wonderful. Well, one day we'll have you here to talk about that in person, Tricia, over a glass of wine.
With lots of alcohol, please. The space is so crazy. We need that.
Thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy, and all.
So fabulous. On that note, it's the end of the day. I guess, did Rodrigo or Nuno want to say anything, or is it okay to just say, guys, alcohol? Thanks, Trisha. I'll be in touch soon.
Okay.